Welcome to The Explainer. In 2018, the United States and China kicked off a trade war that promised to change, well, pretty much everything. But what actually happened? Today, we're going to follow the data to see the real-world impact of this massive economic experiment.
So, what does a trade war actually do? Back in 2018, the U.S. government launched this huge trade action against China, basically rewriting the rules of global commerce. The stated goal? Protect American industries. But the real question for us is, what were the effects on jobs, on prices, and on the whole global supply chain? Let's find out.
$370 billion. That's roughly the value of Chinese imports that got hit with new taxes or tariffs. I mean, the goal was ambitious, right? To totally reshape global trade, bring manufacturing back home, and deal with some long-standing complaints about China's economic practices.
Okay, so how did this all even start? Officially, it was justified under something called Section 301. This pointed to China's policies around intellectual property and, allegedly forcing foreign companies to hand over their tech. To put it simply, the U.S. said China wasn't playing fair, and these tariffs were the big response.
And this wasn't some one-and-done policy. No, the tariffs were rolled out in these escalating waves over almost 2 years. As you can see here, it kicked off in mid-2018, hitting industrial goods. But it just kept growing, wave after wave, until by early 2020, it covered hundreds of billions of dollars worth of products, including a lot of the stuff we buy every day.
So here it is, the billion-dollar question. Did this whole experiment actually work? The main promise, the big selling point, was bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. by making American companies more competitive. This was really the core idea, a concept called reshoring. The logic seems simple enough. If you make Chinese goods more expensive, companies will have a big incentive to move their production and all the jobs that come with it back to the United States. But when economists actually crunched the numbers, they found something kind of surprising. A huge 2023 study from the World Bank went through all the data and, while they couldn't find any real evidence that manufacturing was actually returning to the U.S. in any significant way, despite all that tariff pressure.
Now, the tariffs did cause a major shift, just not the one that was intended. Instead of production coming back to the U.S., imports of those tariffed goods from China just slowed way down compared to imports from everywhere else. The global trade map was definitely being redrawn.
And this chart right here shows you exactly what happened. On the left, that's China's share of U.S. imports for these specific goods in 2017, right before the whole thing started. And on the right, that same share in 2022. The drop is obvious. China was exporting way less of these goods to the U.S. But here's the key. That business wasn't coming home. So if all those manufacturing jobs and exports weren't coming back to the U.S., where on earth did they go? This big disruption created a huge opportunity, and a whole new set of winners popped up to fill the void. This whole situation basically put a business trend that was already happening into overdrive. The China Plus One strategy. Faced with new costs and a lot of uncertainty, global companies didn't just pack up and leave China. Instead, they started actively looking for new manufacturing hubs to spread out their risk.
And when you look at the data, you see this really clear pattern of diversification. Countries in Southeast Asia, along with Mexico, really became the big winners in this global supply chain shuffle. They saw a huge surge in investment in exports to the United States. And we're not just talking about moving simple assembly lines. This shift actually spurred the growth of entire high-tech ecosystems in new places. You had spots like Penang in Malaysia becoming major new hubs for the absolutely booming semiconductor industry.
But this global shuffle wasn't just about factories and shipping containers. These massive policy shifts created ripples that went all the way into American homes, directly affecting the prices of everyday things.
Okay. So to really get how this hits shoppers, a study from the American Economic Association looked at a common appliance, the washing machine. It was one of the first things targeted by the tariffs.
And as you'd probably guess, the tariffs on imported washers did exactly what tariffs are designed to do. They drove up the price for consumers by almost 12%. But that's not the whole story.
So here's where it gets really interesting. Dryers, which are often sold right alongside washers, were not hit with the same tariffs. So you'd think their price would stay about the same, right?
Wrong. Researchers found that the price of dryers also shot up by an almost identical 12%. Why? Because with less competition from imports, domestic producers of both washers and dryers just raised their prices. That meant consumers were paying more across the board.
And this wasn't just about appliances. A study from the Peterson Institute for International Economics looked at the steel tariffs and came to a pretty stunning conclusion. They estimated it cost consumers over $900,000 a year for every single job saved or created in the steel industry. Think about that.
So this whole initial experiment has pretty much permanently changed the landscape of global trade. And now the conversation is shifting to what could possibly come next, based on the lessons from this first big wave. You can see a clear evolution in the strategy being talked about. The first wave was all about targeted tariffs, zeroing in on specific industries and mainly just one country, China. Now, some of the policy proposals on the table are for much broader, universal tariffs. We're talking a potential 10% tariff on pretty much all imports from every country. A move like that would just dramatically raise the stakes. It would almost certainly force even more companies to diversify where they make their stuff to avoid the costs, basically pouring gasoline on the fire of this global supply chain realignment we've been talking about.
So, what's the takeaway here? The Great Tariff Experiment didn't really bring manufacturing home, but it did redraw the global trade map, creating new winners in places like Southeast Asia and Mexico. It also came with some real hidden costs for consumers. And now, as the world kind of braces for the next potential shakeup, the big question is still out there. Who's going to thrive and who's going to get left behind in this great reordering of world trade? The only thing that seems certain is that more change is coming.